September 23, 2018, Mount Holly, North Carolina. A man calls 911 and says he found his wife not breathing, blue, unresponsive. Paramedics arrive. They can't save her. She's 32 years old, a mother of two, and she has a documented history of heart problems. So nobody questions it. The case is closed before it ever opens, and that would have been the end of Stacy Hunsucker's story if she hadn't been an organ donor. Love true crime? The Ultimate Serial Killer Coloring Book features 65 notorious killers brought to life in bold, black and white line art. Single-sided pages dark, detailed, unforgettable. Available now on Amazon. Stacy Elizabeth Robinson was born in 1986 in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, into a family deeply rooted in the small, tight-knit town of Mount Holly. Her parents, John and Susie Robinson, raised her in a community where church pews, Friday night football, and neighborhood cookouts were the architecture of everyday life. She attended East Gaston High School, where she was remembered as warm, creative, and social, the kind of person who noticed people and made them feel seen. After graduating, she didn't leave. That's important. Stacy wasn't someone chasing a different life somewhere else. She chose to stay. She enrolled at Gaston College, where she earned an associate's degree in paralegal sciences, combining a practical skill set with her community roots. She worked at the Stowe YMCA for years. She taught at the preschool at First Baptist Charlotte, then at First Methodist Preschool in Mount Holly. She later worked as a paralegal at Ted Grieve and Associates and Reagan and Reagan. She made painted wooden signs. She went to the beach when she could. She watched sports with the kind of enthusiasm that makes everyone around you feel it too. She was also a lifetime member of Mount Holly First United Methodist Church, not a passive membership, but an active, participatory one. Her faith and her community were the same thing. She didn't separate them. It was in that world, high school bleachers, small-town friendships, church hallways, that she met Joshua Lee Hunsucker. They were high school sweethearts. The kind of story that sounds like a perfect beginning. In 2010, Stacy and Joshua got married in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Friends who attended the wedding or knew the couple in those early years described what sounded like a genuinely happy union. Joshua was a flight paramedic with Atrium Health's MedCenter Air, a high-stakes, physically demanding job that required him to board medical helicopters and stabilize critically ill patients mid-flight. He had been a college football player. He was strong, confident, respected in his profession. Friends remember the couple going to concerts together, cookouts with neighbors, ordinary evenings that make up the texture of a life. One friend later told People magazine that if she had to make a list of people she thought might be capable of crime, Joshua wouldn't have crossed her mind, not once. He was the guy everyone liked. From the outside, Stacy and Joshua had what many people spend their whole lives trying to build: a loving marriage, community, faith, careers, and each other. But in 2013, something began to shift, and not in a way anyone recognized clearly at the time. In 2013, Stacy gave birth to her first daughter, Piper. Not long after, she began experiencing unexplained medical problems. Low heart rate, low blood pressure, episodes that frightened her family and stumped her doctors. A GoFundMe page created by a friend in 2015 described a family struggling through crisis after crisis. And it wasn't over. The family also suffered a devastating house fire during this period, displacing them and adding financial and emotional strain on top of an already difficult medical situation. In 2014, Stacy gave birth to her second daughter, Willow. Shortly after, her symptoms returned and escalated. She was hospitalized with what doctors described as dangerously low blood pressure and a heart rate that couldn't stabilize. She went into cardiac arrest during one of those hospital admissions. Her family watched, terrified, as medical teams worked to bring her back. By 2015, she had a pacemaker implanted in her chest. I want you to hold that detail. She was in her late 20s, 2 young daughters at home, and she's already had cardiac arrest, and now she has a pacemaker. At the time, everyone around her, doctors, family, friends, thought this was just a devastating run of bad luck with her heart. Nobody questioned it. Because why would they? The pacemaker seemed to help. Life began to look more stable. Joshua continued working. The girls grew. Stacy resumed activities. By 2018, she appeared, at least from the outside, to be doing better. She was making her painted signs, taking pictures with her daughters, going to church, living. On the morning of September 23, 2018, everything ended. Joshua called 911. When the dispatcher asked what was happening, he said he had found Stacy unresponsive. Not breathing, her skin turned blue. Emergency responders arrived at the family home in Mount Holly and worked to revive her. They could not. Stacy Robinson Hunsucker was 32 years old. She was pronounced dead. Because of her documented history of cardiac problems, the pacemaker, the hospitalizations, the prior cardiac arrest, her death was initially treated as a natural medical event, a tragic but not entirely surprising conclusion to years of heart trouble, or so it seemed. Investigators did not immediately classify it as suspicious, but almost immediately Joshua's behavior began to raise questions. Not loudly, not officially, but in the minds of the people who loved Stacy most. In the immediate hours and days following Stacy's death, Joshua made a series of decisions that would later become central to the prosecution's case. First, he refused to authorize an autopsy. His stated reason, he didn't want Stacy cut up. The sentiment sounds protective, loving even. But Stacy was a registered organ donor, a decision that would ultimately save the investigation. Within 2 days of her death, Stacy's body was cremated. The physical evidence of whatever had happened to her, her tissue, her organs, her cells, was gone. Also within those 2 days, Joshua filed a claim on Stacy's $200,000 $50,000 life insurance policy. Prosecutors would later allege he ultimately collected more than $200,000 from that policy. To people watching from the outside, it might have been possible to find innocent explanations for each of these decisions in isolation. Grief does strange things to people. People make impulsive financial decisions in moments of shock. But to Stacy's mother, Susie Robinson, these details did not add up to grief. They added up to something else. Susie Robinson went to the North Carolina Department of Insurance. She reported her suspicions about her son-in-law. She pointed investigators toward his behavior. The rapid cremation, the instant insurance claim, the inconsistent stories he had told about what he was doing the moment before he found Stacy unresponsive. Investigators later determined that Joshua had given at least 4 different versions of his whereabouts in the minutes before Stacy collapsed. In one account, he said he had gone outside to check whether the cars were locked because of recent neighborhood thefts. In other versions, he said he had been cutting wood, or had gone for a walk, or had been sitting at his computer. 4 different stories. 1 dead wife. The investigation gained critical momentum because of something Joshua apparently hadn't anticipated: the organ donor blood sample. Because Stacy was registered as an organ donor, medical staff had drawn and preserved a blood sample at the time of her death, standard protocol for organ donation processing. That sample had not been destroyed. It was still preserved in a donor lab. Investigators obtained that sample. They sent it for toxicological analysis. What came back changed everything. The toxicology report found elevated levels of tetrahydrozoline in Stacy's preserved blood. Most people have never heard of tetrahydrozoline, but they've used it. It's the active ingredient in Vicine and several other over-the-counter eye drops and nasal sprays. It's the compound that makes bloodshot eyes go white. It sits in medicine cabinets, gym bags, and desk drawers in millions of homes worldwide. What most people don't know is what happens when tetrahydrozoline is swallowed. When ingested, it becomes a dangerous vasoconstrictive agent. It causes the blood vessels to constrict severely. The heart rate drops. Blood pressure falls. The body becomes lethargic, confused, barely responsive. In higher doses, or in a person with an already compromised cardiovascular system, like someone with a pacemaker and a history of cardiac events, the effects can be lethal. Prosecutors began building a theory. Joshua, a trained flight paramedic with detailed knowledge of how medications affect the human body, had been slipping tetrahydrozoline into Stacy's drinks over an extended period. They argued her years of mysterious cardiac symptoms, the hospitalizations, the unexplained episodes, the cardiac arrest, even possibly the need for the pacemaker itself, may not have been natural at all. On December 19, 2019, Joshua Lee Hunsucker was arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obtaining property by false pretense. The state later announced it would not seek the death penalty. If the story had ended with an arrest and a pending murder trial, it would have been devastating enough. But it didn't end there. In November 2019, while still working as a paramedic and out on bond, Joshua was accused of setting fire to medical equipment aboard one of Atrium Health's medical helicopters during a flight, forcing an emergency landing. He was arrested on that charge in 2021. Then came the kidnapping. At some point after his arrest, Joshua told police that Stacy's father, John Robinson, had ambushed him, pistol-whipped him, zip-tied his hands, and injected him with an unknown substance. It was, if true, a stunning allegation. A grieving grandfather turned violent attacker. Police investigated. They found no evidence the kidnapping had ever occurred. Prosecutors alleged Joshua had staged the entire incident, an attempt to discredit Stacy's family and remove them from the custody of his daughters. Speaking of his daughters, in 2023, authorities alleged that one of his daughters, identified in court documents only as P.H., was hospitalized while in Joshua's care. Her symptoms were hauntingly familiar: low blood pressure, low heart rate, exhaustion, extreme sleepiness, constricted blood vessels. Testing allegedly found tetrahydrozoline in her system, along with a metabolite of an antidepressant not approved for children. Prosecutors argued he had poisoned his own daughter, the same way he had allegedly poisoned her mother, in an attempt to frame the Robinson grandparents and win custody by making them appear to be the danger. By 2024, Joshua faced charges of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. Court documents alleged he had spent years driving past the Robinson home, following them, videotaping them, and mailing them unsolicited packages. In 2025, a judge revoked his bond. He was sent back to jail. As of April 2026, Joshua Lee Hunsucker has pleaded not guilty to all charges, including first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obtaining property by false pretense. He has not been convicted. His defense attorneys filed a motion for a change of venue, arguing that the volume and intensity of local media coverage in Gaston County and Mount Holly makes it impossible to seat an impartial jury. Prosecutors have floated September 8, 2026 as a possible murder trial date. Some charges are expected to be tried separately. Stacy's parents, John and Susie Robinson, have spent the years since their daughter's death fighting on two fronts simultaneously: the criminal case and a wrongful death civil suit against Joshua. They have also sought guardianship of their granddaughters, Piper and Willow. Stacy was cremated before anyone suspected she had been murdered. Her physical remains cannot speak, but the blood sample from an organ donor protocol, a routine medical step Stacy herself had consented to in life, the decision to donate her organs if she died, became the one piece of evidence that could not be destroyed. In trying to end her story completely, prosecutors allege Joshua left open the one door he didn't know existed. The toxicology of tetrahydrozoline. Tetrahydrozoline hydrochloride belongs to a class of drugs called imidazoline derivatives. As a topical ocular or nasal decongestant, it works by activating alpha-adrenergic receptors, causing localized vasoconstriction, which is why it whitens red eyes and relieves nasal congestion. At those levels of topical exposure, the compound is considered safe. When swallowed, however, the pharmacological profile changes dramatically. Ingested tetrahydrozoline is rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream and crosses the blood-brain barrier. It then acts centrally and peripherally on the cardiovascular and nervous systems, producing a constellation of effects: hypotension, critically low blood pressure, bradycardia, dangerously slow heart rate, central nervous system depression, respiratory slowing, hypothermia, and profound lethargy. In severe cases, complete atrioventricular block, where the electrical conduction between the upper and lower chambers of the heart fails, has been documented in medical literature. Critically, these symptoms can develop gradually and intermittently if the substance is administered in low doses over time. A person experiencing them might present to doctors with unexplained cardiac episodes, low blood pressure of unknown origin, and fatigue, symptoms that, without toxicological testing specifically looking for tetrahydrozoline, would not typically be identified as poisoning. This is precisely why Stacy's years of cardiac problems are so central to the prosecution's theory. prosecutors contend that what her doctors were treating as a mysterious cardiac condition may have been the ongoing cumulative effect of repeated low-dose poisoning, a theory supported by the documented pharmacological behavior of the compound. The presence of tetrahydrozoline in Stacy's organ donor blood sample is the forensic cornerstone of the case. The sample was drawn at the time of death and preserved under standard organ donation protocols, which include stringent chain of custody procedures. This makes the sample legally and scientifically defensible. It cannot be dismissed as contaminated or mislabeled without extraordinary evidence. Joshua's professional background as a flight paramedic is also forensically significant. Flight paramedicine requires comprehensive pharmacological training. A flight paramedic is expected to understand drug interactions, dosing thresholds, cardiovascular pharmacology, and the physiological effects of substances on compromised patients. Prosecutors argue this knowledge base gave him the understanding to select a poison that would produce symptoms mimicking his wife's existing cardiac presentation, and the confidence that those symptoms would be attributed to natural causes. What chills me about this from a forensic standpoint is that tetrahydrozoline is available to anyone. No prescription, no background check. You can buy it at any pharmacy for a few dollars. The poison isn't exotic. That's part of what makes this case so disturbing. The architecture of intimate partner homicide. Cases like this one follow patterns that criminologists and forensic psychologists have documented extensively in intimate partner homicide research. Understanding those patterns doesn't make the crime less horrifying. It makes it more comprehensible, which is its own kind of uncomfortable. The method allegedly used, chronic, covert poisoning, is rare in intimate partner homicide statistics. But when it occurs, it tends to share specific psychological features with the alleged perpetrator. It requires patience, sustained deception, calculated observation of the victim's symptoms, and a fundamental detachment from the humanity of the person being harmed. It is not an impulsive act. Every alleged administration of the substance was a choice, made in close proximity to someone who trusted completely. From a psychological standpoint, the alleged behavior pattern attributed to Joshua across the full arc of this case, if prosecutors' allegations are accurate, suggests several overlapping characteristics. The first is what psychologists call impression management, the deliberate construction and maintenance of a public persona dramatically at odds with private behavior. Friends consistently describe a man who appeared loving, normal, unremarkable. The gap between that social presentation and the allegations is not incidental. It is the mechanism. The second characteristic is the alleged financial motivation combined with relational entrapment. The $250,000 life insurance policy represents a concrete external incentive. But prosecutorial theory also suggests that the marriage itself had become something Stacy's alleged killer wanted to exit without consequences. Covert chronic poisoning in this framework is not passion. It is logistics. The third and perhaps most psychologically striking feature is the pattern of escalating post-arrest behavior described by prosecutors. The alleged helicopter fire, the fabricated kidnapping, the alleged poisoning of his own daughter, the alleged harassment of Stacy's parents. If these allegations reflect reality, they describe a person whose risk assessment became increasingly distorted under pressure. a psychology that doubles down when threatened rather than withdrawing. The daughter's alleged poisoning deserves particular attention. Prosecutors' theory is that she was poisoned not out of hostility toward her specifically, but instrumentally, as a means to reframe the narrative and remove a threat to custody. This kind of instrumental harm toward one's own child to achieve a strategic goal is one of the more disturbing patterns documented in forensic psychological literature on this type of offender. It is also worth noting the profound psychological burden placed on Susie and John Robinson across these years. They lost their daughter to what they believed was a preventable homicide. They then faced years of alleged harassment, a fabricated accusation of kidnapping directed at John specifically, and the trauma of watching their granddaughter allegedly become a victim as well. The psychological research on secondary victims of intimate partner homicide consistently finds that this group, the parents, siblings, and close friends of the deceased, is significantly underserved in both public narrative and clinical support systems. If this case affected you the way it affected me, hit subscribe. We cover cases like this one every single week. Real people, real stories, told with the respect they deserve. And if you're new here, welcome. There's a lot more where this came from. See you in the next one.